So this guy killed his business partner. Then he spent the next 6 months emailing the dead man's family, pretending to be him. And get this, they all wrote back. His father, his brother, his girlfriend. For 6 months, they thought he was alive. Every email came signed with the dead man's name. Every single one was typed by the man who killed him. This is the story of a man who murdered the guy he built a company with, and then answered his mail. It starts with 2 men and a company, an internet advertising business, in a small office south of Los Angeles. One of them was Chris Smith, 33, easygoing, the kind of guy who kept a surfboard in the corner of his office. The other was Edward Shin, Ed. Sharp, ambitious, always working an angle you couldn't quite see. On paper, they were partners, equals, split the company down the middle. The truth was messier than that. Because Ed had a secret, and it was the kind that costs money he didn't have. Before this company, Ed worked somewhere else, and while he was there, he'd been quietly helping himself to the accounts. An audit found around $700,000 gone. Money that wasn't his, spent like it was. That's not a mistake you explain away. That's a problem with a prison sentence attached. And it caught up with him. In May of 2010, Ed was convicted and ordered to pay every dollar back. 9 days later, Chris Smith would be seen alive for the last time. Think about where that left Ed. A record, a bill he couldn't cover, and a partner who owned half the company. And Chris had started noticing things. Money was leaving the company account, and it wasn't adding up. He said it straight out, in an email. He thought Ed was draining the business. So they set a meeting, sit down, open the books, and figure out how Ed was going to make it right. Friday evening, June 4th. After the last employee had gone home for the weekend. What happened in that office that night, only one man lived to tell. And he's told it more than one way. This part isn't in question. Chris walked into that office that evening. He never walked out. Investigators would find blood, enough of it in the wrong places that this was never a man who simply wandered off. Ed's version, years later, was that Chris came at him, that they fought, and Chris fell and hit his head. An accident, he'd call it. A fight that got away from him. Nothing he ever meant to do. But an accident ends with a phone call. You dial 911. You don't sit down and rent a truck. Ed didn't call anyone. Within hours, he was at Chris's keyboard, typing in Chris's name. The first email went out that same night. Not to family, to Chris's lawyer. Attached to it was a buyout agreement. It handed Ed the whole company, signed, supposedly, by Chris himself. In one night, Ed erased Chris and made himself the owner. On paper, it looked clean. Then he dealt with the office, closed it for about a week, told the staff to work from home. Prosecutors say he used that week to get rid of the body and to scrub a room that still held what happened in it. When the employees came back, the boss was feeling generous. He handed out fat bonuses. Nothing buys quiet like a surprise check with a lot of zeros on it. Chris's body has never been found. Not that week. Not now. Not in more than 15 years of searching. Authorities believe Ed drove it out toward the desert near the border and left it where nobody looks. Now came the hard part. Explaining to everyone who loved Chris why he'd suddenly vanished. So Ed gave them a story. A good one. Chris had sold his share of the company and gone traveling. Night after night, Ed sat at Chris's keyboard and wrote Chris's happiness for him. The emails kept coming for months. More than 100 of them. All signed Chris. All written by his killer. In them, Chris was everywhere. The Galápagos, Costa Rica, sailing off Argentina, surfing in South Africa. One landed in his father and brother's inbox, a sailing trip near Argentina, like a postcard from paradise. His girlfriend got a crueler version. Chris, she was told, had run off with a Playboy model he'd just met, using a dead man's account to dump his girlfriend. It's hard to imagine a colder thing to do. The story came with props, a chartered yacht, a stack of gold coins, an account hidden in the Cayman Islands. When Chris's father asked how his son was paying for all of it, Ed had that covered too. He'd wired Chris the buyout, he said, $1.5 million, sent to that Cayman account. And Chris was traveling on a fake passport. Bought, Ed said, from a man he called Johnny Vegas. It was a wild story. Detailed, exotic, always just out of reach. And for a while, everyone believed it. Everyone except one person, Chris's father. A father knows his son. And the Chris in these emails never once wanted to talk. He asked for a phone call, just to hear his voice. Then a video chat. Every time, Chris had a reason he couldn't. And slowly, the father stopped believing the reasons. Then the emails just stopped. No last message. No goodbye. Nothing. So he started checking. He called the hotels his son was supposedly staying in. None of them had ever heard of Chris. So he went higher. He asked the State Department to trace his son. The answer came back flat. Chris's passport had never been used. He had never left the country. And the father understood what that meant. If none of the trip was real, then Chris wasn't traveling. Chris was gone. In April of 2011, he did what no parent wants to do. He filed a missing person report. Now the police were looking, and a private investigator went straight to the office. And there, months later, they found it. Chris's blood, in the room, never fully cleaned away. There was blood in his Range Rover, too. And then the emails themselves turned on the man who wrote them. Those messages from Chris, off surfing in Africa, investigators traced them to a computer inside the United States. Ed's. By that August, the walls were closing in, and Ed seemed to feel it. Detectives found him at the Los Angeles airport. He was boarding a flight to Canada. At first, he stayed with the story. Chris was traveling. Chris had sold the company. Chris was fine. Then they told him what they found in the office. And Ed's story changed on the spot. Now it wasn't Chris's blood. Now there'd been a fight. Now Chris was dead, but it was an accident. For a man who just survived a fight to the death, Ed didn't have a scratch on him. It took years to get in front of a jury. The trial didn't start until late 2018. It went to one of Orange County's most respected homicide prosecutors, a man named Matt Murphy. And Murphy barely had to reach. His whole case was built out of Ed's own choices. The forged buyout, the bonuses, the emails. The defense had one card. Without a body, nobody could say for certain how Chris died. So maybe it really was an accident. Ed took the stand himself. He admitted to the emails. He called pretending to be Chris the most awful thing he'd ever done. Which is telling. He ranked the emails above the killing. But awful isn't the same as innocent. The jury heard 6 months of careful lies from a man begging them to believe one honest slip. They set it against the facts. No injuries, a forged contract sent within hours, a father who had to call the government to find his son. On December 7th, after an 18-day trial, the jury left to decide. They came back fast. Under 2 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder, with a finding that Ed did it for the money. The next summer, the sentence landed. Life, with no chance of parole. Ed Shin will die in prison. He appealed. A higher court read the whole record and backed every word of it. The conviction holds. And after all of it, one thing is still missing. Chris Smith has never come home. His family got a verdict. They never got a grave. They're still owed that. The cruelest part was never the money. It was the 6 months a father spent writing back to his son's killer. Sure, he was writing to his boy. Ed Shin didn't just take a life. He took the place where the grief should have gone and filled it with a lie. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments what you'd have done in that father's place. And be careful who you trust. And take care of yourself. Everything you saw here comes from court records and news reporting. The images are illustrations, not real footage. And all of it is true.